started as a typical Tuesday morning at St. Mary's Hospital. Clara Reynolds, a 30-year-old nurse with 6 years of experience, was recognized for her strict attention to procedure, but also for her firm belief that patients always took precedence over paperwork. Clara spotted the subtle shake in his hands as the orderlies rolled in the newly arrived patient. Leonard Garrison, 78, wore an old veteran's cap that had clearly seen better days. A slim oxygen tube rested under his nose, and his aged face bore the deep creases of a life richly lived. The medical file showed he'd been moved for advanced cardiac treatment following a string of troubling incidents. As Clara walked past, clipboard in hand, checking another patient's medication chart, she heard it. The unmistakable alarm of a flatlining heart monitor. She turned and saw Leonard's body stiffen. The orderlies stood still, unsure. At that instant, no doctors were nearby in the hallway. Without delay, Clara let go of her clipboard. The clatter of plastic on linoleum cut through the now silent corridor. She dashed to Leonard's side, dropped the stretcher rail. "Code Blue," she called, her voice calm despite the surge of adrenaline. "Get a crash cart." Her hands went to Leonard's chest, fingers interlocked, arms straight, shoulders squared. She started compressions with practiced precision. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted silently, holding the rhythm that might keep this man alive. Sweat formed on her brow as she hit the 90-second mark, her arms burned, yet still unresponsive. "Come on," she murmured. "Fight." After nearly 2 minutes, an eternity, Leonard's chest suddenly jerked on its own. A faint but undeniable pulse returned. Clara stepped back, her scrubs soaked with sweat, arms quivering from the effort. That's when Supervisor Margaret Walters appeared, her face twisted with bureaucratic rage. She didn't ask about the patient's status, didn't acknowledge the life just saved. "Who gave you permission to intervene?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the charged air. "This patient isn't assigned to your unit. You breached protocol." Clara stood frozen, still catching her breath as Margaret seized her ID badge. "You're suspended pending investigation. Clear out your locker." Clara glanced once more at Leonard, now breathing regularly, just as the emergency team finally arrived. She gave a small nod, then turned and walked off, her footsteps ringing in the now silent corridor. Stories like these persist because of people like you. Stay tuned and help share what matters. Clara sat alone in the staff lounge, staring at her reflection in the untouched coffee. The suspension letter lay beside her, effective immediately. The hospital board had called a sudden disciplinary meeting in an hour. The allegation? Unauthorized medical action beyond her designated role. Through the glass panels, she could see co-workers offering pitying looks, but most avoided eye contact. Hospital politics. No one wanted to be next. Her phone vibrated. A message from Nurse Jenkins. "You did the right thing, but they're terrified of lawsuits. Don't expect admin support." Clara slipped the phone back into her pocket. 6 years of perfect evaluations, dozens of lives impacted, and now her future teetered over one choice: refusing to let someone die. The conference room was unnecessarily chilly when Clara entered. 5 faces turned: nursing director, hospital executive, legal advisor, HR rep, and of course, Supervisor Walters, no allies. "Miss Reynolds," the administrator began, rearranging papers with exaggerated care, "you understand why we're here. Your behavior this morning represents a significant violation of medical policy." "I performed CPR on a patient in cardiac arrest," Clara said, her voice soft but steady. "No doctors were on site. The transport team lacked advanced life support training." "That wasn't your call to make," Walters cut in. "He wasn't your assigned patient. Protocol exists for a reason." "If I'd waited for clearance," Clara interrupted, locking eyes with her superior, "Mr. Garrison would be dead. Is that the result you would have preferred?" The room went quiet. Out of the corner of her eye, Clara spotted a man in a dark suit standing from a chair in the waiting area. He had been listening closely. Without a word, he turned and walked off, phone already to his ear. "This isn't about opinions," the legal counsel spoke deliberately. "It's about liability and established procedures when personnel operate outside their designated roles. My role is saving lives." Clara said, "That's what I was trained for. That's what I vowed to do." The administrator exhaled heavily. We'll reconvene after reviewing the surveillance footage. Until then, your suspension remains. What no one in that room realized was that the man who had been listening, the one who had quietly stepped away to make a call, was retired Colonel James Garrison, Leonard's younger sibling, and he had caught everything in a secluded spot of the hospital lobby. James spoke urgently into his phone. "General? It's Garrison. I need a favor." His tone dropped lower. "Someone is owed protection and acknowledgement. How fast can you get here?" Back in the locker room. Clara slowly gathered her belongings, a framed photo from her graduation, a coffee mug, gifted by a grateful patient's family, small tokens from a career she had given her soul to. She wondered how many lives would be lost to red tape and bureaucracy, how many snap decisions would be questioned by those who had never made them. She didn't regret her actions. She would do it again, even if it cost her all she had. At exactly 11 a.m., the distinct sound of polished dress shoes on linoleum turned heads throughout the hospital's administrative hall. A tall man in full military dress uniform walked with determination through the corridors. Colonel Michael Harris, decorated war veteran and current military liaison officer, carried a wooden case under one arm and an official envelope stamped with government seals. In his other hand, the medals on his chest reflected the fluorescent lights, each one a symbol of courage. Civilians rarely understand. "I need to speak with your hospital director," he told the stunned receptionist. His tone steady, but leaving no room for refusal right away. The receptionist scrambled for the phone, eyes wide at the commanding figure before her. "Sir, can I ask what this is concerning?" "It pertains to a matter of honor," the colonel responded, standing ramrod straight, his cap neatly tucked under his arm, and a nurse named Clara Reynolds. Within minutes, Clara was called back to the same meeting room. This time, however, the atmosphere had shifted significantly. The hospital director herself had joined them, her normally confident air noticeably tempered. At the head of the table sat Colonel Harris, his expression unreadable beneath years of military conditioning, his weathered face betraying nothing but the weight of his intent. "I understand," the colonel began, his voice carrying a commanding authority that required no volume to be felt, "that Nurse Reynolds has been suspended for administering life-saving care to Leonard Garrison." The director shifted in her leather seat, manicured fingers rearranging papers that didn't require it. "Colonel, with the utmost respect, this is a hospital internal matter." "Leonard Garrison," the colonel went on, undeterred, each word slow and purposeful, "is not merely another patient." He opened a wooden box with reverent care, revealing a Purple Heart medal resting against rich blue velvet. The medal shimmered under the conference room lighting, its purple and gold hues stark against the hospital's sterile whites and blues. Staff Sergeant Leonard Garrison served 3 tours in Vietnam. During his second, he carried 4 wounded comrades through enemy fire after their chopper was shot down. With shrapnel in his leg and burns across his back, he returned to the wreckage 3 times, refusing evacuation until every man was rescued. 2 of those men are now surgeons. One is a congressman. The room went silent. Even Supervisor Walters seemed to shrink in her chair, her earlier righteousness vanishing like early fog. Colonel Harris pushed a USB drive across the table. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing your surveillance footage. It clearly shows that Nurse Reynolds was the only medical professional who acted correctly during a critical moment. She followed every emergency procedure precisely as she should have." The director inserted the drive into her laptop. The room watched quietly as the morning's events played out on screen. Clara's instant reaction, the flawless form of her CPR, and the vital minutes that ticked before anyone else arrived to assist in the military. Colonel Harris began, "We have a saying, initiative in the absence of commands. It means doing the right thing when there's no time to wait for approval. It's what we train our finest for." He turned toward Clara. "Your actions represent the highest values of medical care and human compassion. You didn't need to know Sergeant Garrison's service record to understand his life was worth saving." The hospital director cleared her throat. "Given this added context, I believe we must revisit our decision. Miss Reynolds' suspension is lifted immediately. That's not enough." Colonel Harris stated firmly, "This woman deserves commendation, not just an apology. She represents everything your hospital should uphold. The director slowly nodded. You're correct, and we'll review our emergency procedures to ensure nothing like this happens again. Supervisor Walter stared down at her clasped hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Sometimes, Colonel Harris said, standing up, the boldest act isn't charging into battle. Sometimes it's challenging those who are supposed to stand with you. He extended a hand to Clara on behalf of the military and the Garrison family. I thank you. As Clara shook his hand, she noticed something she'd missed before. The colonel wore a medical corps pin on his uniform. He had once been one of them. You don't owe me an apology, Colonel Harris told the hospital administrators as he prepared to depart. You owe her your thanks. Some individuals don't need authority, just the instinct to preserve life. Subscribe, so you never miss stories about those who choose to do what's right. 3 days later, Clara stood beside Leonard Garrison's bed in the ICU. His eyelids fluttered open, slowly focusing on her face. Recognition settled in his weathered features. You're the one, he murmured, his voice raspy. My brother told me everything. Clara adjusted his IV line. Just doing my duty, Mr. Garrison. Leonard's hand, mottled with age but still firm, reached for hers. I pulled men from flaming helicopters, he said. Carried comrades through jungles when they couldn't walk. Never once imagined, his eyes welled up. Never imagined someone would save me. One day, Clara gently squeezed his hand. That's how it works. We care for each other. Later that day, Clara saw Supervisor Walters waiting at the nurse's station. The older woman's typically stiff stance had softened. Her eyes lowered. Nurse Reynolds, she began, her tone unusually tentative. I owe you an apology, a public one. She motioned to the staff gathering for shift change, May. Clara nodded, unsure what was coming. Walters cleared her throat, drawing the attention of the dozen nurses getting ready for the night shift. I need to acknowledge something important, she said aloud. 3 days ago, Nurse Reynolds made a decision that saved someone's life. I reacted by disciplining her for it. Her voice trembled slightly. I was mistaken, and I apologized. To Clara's surprise, the head nurse went on, starting. Today we're launching a new emergency response rule. The Clara Code read, granting any certified nurse the authority to start emergency measures if a physician isn't immediately present, one after another. The nurses stood up. The clapping began slowly, then swelled until the room echoed with it. Clara felt a warm flush rise to her cheeks. Dr. Morris, the hospital's chief medical officer, stepped into the doorway. Nurse Reynolds, he called out over the noise, the director would like to meet with you in her office. Clara was caught off guard to see both Colonel Harris and James Garrison waiting there with hospital leadership. We've been evaluating our emergency procedures, the director explained, and we've found them lacking, too centered on rank and not enough on saving lives. She handed Clara a binder. We'd like you to lead a committee to update them with your insight and ethical compass. You're the best person to take charge of this. As Clara exited the office, her restored ID badge fastened securely to her scrubs. She paused by the ICU window. Leonard sat upright in bed, his brother James beside him, both laughing at a memory they shared. She thought about the narrow gap between rules and reason, about how systems meant to protect can sometimes fail, and the bravery needed to tell the difference when Clara stepped into the ICU for her evening shift. The usual motion briefly stopped, but this time the faces that turned toward her carried something. Not inspection or blame now, but respect. She gave a slight nod before turning back to her patients. After all, they were the reason she came. Some things hadn't changed. There are professionals trained to save lives, but not all have the bravery to act when no one says they can. Clara didn't wait. And because of that, a life continued, a rulebook changed, and a neighborhood learned what truly counts. In a world often frozen by guidelines and authorizations, it's easy to lose sight of why those structures were built. They were meant to protect life, not stop heroes from rising. The hospital's updated Clark Code Red wasn't merely a policy change. It was a reminder of the heartbeat behind every directive. Leonard Garrison had spent years thinking he was the one who rescued others. It took Clara Reynolds to show him that bravery can move both ways, that sometimes the front line is a hospital hallway, and the true threat isn't distant, it's our fear of coloring outside the lines. Maybe Clara's biggest win wasn't against hospital red tape. It was for every patient yet to come, for those whose lives would now be spared because someone had the guts to change the rules of consent when seconds mattered. Sometimes the truest heroism doesn't happen on battlefields, but in hospital halls. Sometimes the boldest choices aren't about following procedures, but about remembering why those procedures were made. Have you ever seen someone condemned for doing the right thing? Tell us your story in the comments. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where brave deeds are always remembered the way they should be. You had no clearance to touch that patient, the supervisor shouted, while the nurse's hands still shook from performing CPR. That wasn't even your responsibility. But she had been the only one who took action. The next day, a senior officer stepped into the ICU with a folded American flag, and a question that left the whole hospital in stunned silence. Ever seen someone disciplined for doing what's right? Type 1 if you have.